right now, given a whole day of studio visits. I think like 8 straight hours, but maybe we can chat a little bit, take like 2 questions.
Yeah,
About that.
I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, and also to stick around and chat afterwards. And
Yeah.
as some of you might know, I'm doing a talk tomorrow at the NCA. So I'm also happy to chat there too, and it will kind of go into greater depth about some of the material and talk through it a little bit.
Because you're giving a lecture after the screening.
Yeah, no, I'm doing actually the lecture first. So it'll be a good opportunity to kind of identify and pull out some different parts of the screening, and then see, the video for a second time.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming to Portland and sharing your work with us.
You're screening this at the NCA.
Yes.
How does that feel?
Wild. And I think this is like there's a cultural reckoning that I think really needs to happen. And doesn't start with this work at all. Like, as you've seen, Aria's done really important work there, and Manny's done some really important work there. I think that it's part of a bigger discussion, but I feel like it's really necessary to consider this idea of what meme culture is as it maps to Blackness. And so part of the work that I've been doing is thinking about a way where that history is expanded, because I do think that oftentimes people are seeing it solely as this beginning site being within a digital discussion, like things happening within the material of the internet, right? And actually, it's a much more complicated history, and the way that Black visual culture has shaped and made space for certain modes of sort of emancipatory whiteness, like thinking through the work that, Mia Hill did in that context, right? Or Magic Johnson did in that context, where it really created a space for other types of discussions tied to kind of race and gender to be negotiated. I think it's a really challenging thing too, moments where as well there are components of that history that have been used quite literally to shape what we understand as like a GIF today, right? Or this idea of what like a meme is as a repetitive image within a kind of visual vernacular of a YouTube culture or social media culture. So part of what the research is and like what it is it's continuing to grow is looking from like around 1900 to present day and thinking through moments in time where not only Black labor has created space for a broader cultural conversation to take place, right, at the kind of expense and tax of our work, right, but ways where queerness and Blackness have intersected and have expanded certain types of conversations, and two, where the Black image has been kind of co-opted and used as a kind of material to push further these things that we see today as kind of being part of our everyday vernacular, and they're not, right? They're kind of without certain citations and often borrowed and kind of repurposed in a way that is really triggering. So when you ask this question about, what does it feel like? I think, Portland is a space that, has a complicated history in its own right. And I think that this work, like being screened and debuting in this space means something very particular and is done with some intention there. Yeah, recognizing too that it is difficult. Yeah. I hope it will be uncomfortable a little bit. Yeah, if that's okay to say. Yeah.
Yeah, Portland is such a specific place too in terms of like Nike being here,
Mm-hmm,
and the kind of the ways that Nike plays into like, child slaves make the shoes,
right.
And they're part of this huge affective circulation in America as like the coolest shoe or something,
right?
So I think about that a lot, like how that kind of work gets done in a place like this and how difficult and isolating it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole Nike conversation, like the epicenter of like a kind of Colin Kaepernick discussion there too, is very difficult, right? And like what it does in terms of that work and how it's been kind of co-opted and then repurposed towards kind of commercial means is complicated and ties to into like ways where certain types of space is being made and kind of asking questions that kind of at whose expense and at whose labor, who is kind of doing that heavy lifting and like at what cost. So I think it's like a challenging fault line to have these discussions maybe here, but I also recognize too that this is something that like archivally, as I have been kind of hoarding different bits and pieces, like looking at how these things can relate and thinking about the kind of through line, I think that there's so much more than even just there are 21 examples currently that I'm kind of been writing about, so much more than 21 examples, right? But I picked 21 because these are things that I feel like that have at certain points fallen away in terms of cultural material, like the kiss that happens right before the moonlight gif is a kiss that is from a film that is called Lime Kiln Field Day, which is currently held in MoMA's collection. And it's an interesting story because it's it is the first on record that we currently still have as an archival material film of that shows an integrated cast and is with all Black actors. And so it's a kind of complicated thing because it's basically one of the earliest records of a Black intimacy. And Burt Williams and Odessa Gray, who are in that film, are these two incredible actors who at the time were very wealthy and well known and recognized. Burt Williams in that film, even though he is a Black person, appears in blackface, which at the time, in terms of the coding of it, right, is really complicated because the way that kind of the rules of minstrelsy operated across all, even Blackness and whiteness, is that if in theory somebody was in blackface, it kind of let other people off the hook in terms of being Black actors and coexisting in that space. So it's actually kind of a really great act of sacrifice, right? If we can kind of read it as that, right? That he kind of took that weight on and wore that face because it allowed all the other Black actors in the film to not have to wear blackface, which should not be a big deal, but is actually a huge deal. And then to have a Black man and a Black woman kissing on screen is something that, like, at that point in time was literally unheard of. And this is a film that came at the same period of time as Birth of a Nation, within a 2-year period. And Birth of a Nation, as many of you might know if you've read about kind of Cinema 101, is something that has been definitely interrogated in the way that it should be as being a deeply fucked up film, right? But then the other side of it is that people actually, when they read it formally, say that it's one of the greatest works of American cinema, right? They put it at this Genesis story that is so actually quite complimentary. So it's this very kind of perverse and complicated history of visual culture, right? That these two films, which actually came out of the same production house, in a 2-year period would be positioned in that way. And kind of that the Genesis story of American film and cinema and kind of Cinema 101 classes often uses Birth of a Nation, not only of course to critique race and race politics and kind of race relations in a moment in time, but also from a formal perspective, cites it as a place to kind of draw from in terms of certain citations there. And if we think about the overlay of text and image, and as well kind of the way that the image moves too is kind of a gesture, that is something that, when we see it there and we kind of cross-reference it against a GIF image, it is kind of very interesting to see what the similarities are formally and how we kind of have been able to replicate some of those same cinematic things within a context that actually really sort of is a theft of certain aspects of a Black affect. So there are these really complicated things that kind of make you have to ask, why is it that the Genesis story begins there and not with Lime Kiln Field Day, with Burt Williams and Odessa Gray, and why is it that you can tell kind of within an American context, right, have to be framed through a lens that actually really supports some of the greatest supremacies, within our national fabric, and there's more to be done, I think, to examine that and to ask why that is and to maybe encourage other starting points.
Sorry, you brought up the copy of the original because I feel like Black folks talk about music is being very self-referential. You can't list a single song by a Black artist without having it or reference some other Black artist somewhere. And I think that really ties in the African principle of Sankofa. We're constantly going back and getting it. We're constantly being self-referential. We have this almost intangible known history without having it written.
Right.
That is just like intrinsic to Blackness. It's like I really appreciate that like reconceptualization.
Yeah, I mean, like that kind of idea of like a remix of sorts, right? And a repurposing. I mean, the Moonlight Kiss for me, like as a GIF, I think is such a thing I could like watch for ages because I think a lot about like what the full arc is between that initial kiss, like which is like I think a 1913 kiss, right? To a moonlight kiss, right? And like these acts of black intimacy, right, are often ones that like if you're looking even just like in Giphy, like they're not prioritized in like what people are seeing. And so like to have moments obviously where gifs are created that like create space for that, for these kind of acts of care, right? Things that are joyful and like intimate and complex, right? And show like depth within a blackness, I think is really necessary and within a queerness too. But like the remixes as a kind of language, right, across the Black culture is something that, you know, I feel like can be sort of quite challenging when you see it through another lens where like even with Paris is Burning, right, like a whole language of kind of Black queerness, right, has just been like literally thefted, pulled from that and then basically placed elsewhere. And there are so many people who use that language who actually don't have any idea what Paris is Burning is. And then as well, even if you know what Paris is Burning is, there's so much that's complicated about the production of that as a film and like why that exists and what it did and how it existed in that moment. So I think like slowing down a little bit as we're like reading what like the idea of the meme is and like what it is to kind of like copy and repurpose, and who does that and like at whose hand is a really important question.
I was kind of on that last point you were saying, and I'm not aware of to what extent you used archival from MoMA in this, but kind of like how
Nothing is from MoMA. Everything is taken, right? And I did that, but that is not, it's intentional. There's nothing here. And I think that there's something that is like challenging, complicated about that, right? But I also am not selling this as a video, and it's not something that's like circulating widely. It's something that my hope is the reason why I created it is because there is a talk that is supposed to like go with it, right? And so when Manny asked, like, you know, in what context can it be shown, I was like, I think it would be good to show it here only because there is this talk that's happening tomorrow, which I hope you guys will come to. It's supposed to give a series of sort of citations that then can be unpacked further. And so like in a different world and context, if this were to travel out and on its own without me here to talk about it, my hope is that it would come with that as a material so that people can like spend some time with it, because it deserves that time. Yeah, just to clarify.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
heard
No,
you
I think
mention
it's just
MoMA
good to mention.
archives,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
How it might, as also as like accessing images throughout.
Oh, we will go into that
Cool.
tomorrow. Yeah. I like definitely want to talk about that. I think that the way to the institutions house and kind of gatekeep certain types of archival material is really difficult. And we think about the idea of kind of a mimetic blackness and kind of who, even with the best intentions, is able to provide those permissions. It is really, really complicated and does not do much work to kind of reset or kind of better position the complicated dynamics of power that exist across these histories. Yeah. Any questions?
I don't want to go back to this music point that they made because when I'm thinking of like Keith Obadike, for example, early 2000s work around things like Blackness for Sale and understanding these networks of circulation of both stolen Black affect and like violent anti-Black, like, you know, videos of Rodney King and stuff like that, which a lot of people cite as the first meme.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And it's like, it's actually, they cite it as the first viral video, which is very intense, but they actually cite that dancing baby as the first meme,
Got it.
just to kind of,
Interesting.
not to slag on you, flex it on you, but I will say,
say.
because I think, I mean, does everyone here know what Uga Chaka baby is? Okay, just to, and we'll get into it more tomorrow if you guys come through, but I'll just quickly explain because I think it's important, right? That baby is very racist, and it is wild.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember that baby circulating? Like it came in people, it was emailed around. Like it was really interesting as I was like kind of going back in my like lived experience memory of being like what are certain things that stood out to me in terms of shaping my own Blackness and queerness, and like at least making me like I remember when I saw that Dennis Rodman clip in real time. I remember having like a moment as a little me being like, holy shit, like this is so wild, right? And like Dennis Rodman is a complicated character, right? It's not to say like it's not to exalt or like denigrate anyone in particular, I think, but it's interesting what moments across history made space for certain things to happen. And that really is like why certain things are being brought into center focus here. And that dancing baby is really interesting because as a racialized body, it is highly racialized. It is a racialized body that thefts from a Latinx history, right? It also is called the cha-cha, baby cha-cha. And, you know, it's not actually doing the cha-cha, which is wild, right? So it's like, why would you call it that? It was created by somebody named Michael Gerard, who was very, very well versed in choreography and the study of human movement, right? And so the fact that somebody who understands dance has borrowed from and looked at and like kind of rendering bodies, real bodies to create motion, like things in motion, would not base this on a real body or real motions, nor would actually cite an actual dance that is a cha-cha, but would actually make up a fantasy of what that would be and then put it out into the world. And in its early form, it came as a video, a short video that then was compressed. And in the compression of the video, it was like able to transfer faster, but then people put it to music, which is how that Uga Chaka, which is a song that is by the Swedish band named Blue Suede, like ended up using this baby, overlaid it with a song. And then in a really perverse twist, it showed up on Ally McBeal. Yes, which is hella wild. Like it is crazy. So it was on Ally McBeal on an episode called Cro-Magnon, right? Where a white woman basically has a fantasy of a black baby, a hallucination of a black baby who appears and actually strangely is white. Like if you can find it online, the baby is lighter skinned and has a different nose structure. It literally looks like a different baby. It's a sort of restructured baby in its form. That is this fantasy of this white woman whenever she's stressed out about having a kid. Right? So it's like it's so gendered and complicated and super like bizarre, and it feels like you can't make this stuff up. It's like it feels like somebody should have known better and been like, maybe we should think this through. But it has happened and it exists within our history, and those are things that actually within, as we think about this culture, right? Like a lot has been built on that and still circulates very widely. And so the fact that there is this, like, again, Dennis's story of that Uga Chaka baby is a whole other set of things.
Uga Chaka is like racist gibberish.
Yes,
It's
it
like
literally,
tribal,
it's
fake tribal,
a
yeah.
total fantasy from a white imagination of what a tribal language is, right? And like what that vernacular is. So there's so many layered projections, right? Layered projections of a kind of Afro-Latinx, like sort of borrowing of movement, right? In terms of a cultural dance, right? And what that is. And then a layering too of like a different type of fantasy where it's like, let's just layer like all things ethnic onto this body and project all these fantasies onto it. And it's a child. It's literally a baby. So that's also the thing that I think is really bizarre. And it has a lot of spin-offs, which you also, if you really dig for it, you can find them, but I did not include them here, of like a samurai baby and a Rasta baby that all are from that period of time. So basically there were adults who were out in the world who were like, idea, let's take already a racialized form, further sort of modify and kind of manipulate it in a way that is incredibly violent and continue to recirculate it as a site of ridicule. And that is kind of like the birth of what we know now as being a kind of a moving meme or GIF. It's very wild.
This is a 20th century watermelon link.
Yes, it's really, but this is why I think it's also interesting because it extends beyond where our current imagination often ends, because there are so many things I think that happened, which like we also were not even in the moment thinking of their like site specificity across the history. We were just like seeing them maybe in an inbox, like, and at the time it felt insignificant. But if we're looking at it now I think it's really important to revisit these materials and kind of ask, like, similar to all the time spent in many, many film studies classes about talking about Birth of a Nation, talking about that dancing baby is an incredibly important conversation to have if you're thinking about new media. So yeah, it's something that is worth being shocked by for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of deracialization that happens, like the way Black affect is stolen, has a lot to do with like cultural memory and how
Yes.
short it is.
Yeah,
Right, and the way that tech kind of accelerates cultural amnesia around that stuff.
definitely.
Because deracialization is like old. Like, it's not
Yeah.
a new thing at all. Right? I'm thinking of like
No.
the word goober comes from Kikongo, Cuba.
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And that happened like over 100 years ago. But the process was slow. It probably took a couple generations.
Yeah.
Whereas now there's an app called Yo, right? Or Peaches
Yes.
Monroe, who remains unpaid, could create a viral word in a week.
Right.
It's, the pace has changed a lot.
Yeah, I think the pace is that is part of the thing that makes it really disturbing things very quickly.
Mhm.
And so even if you do see it, right, like almost there's so much else
You
to
just
see,
forget about it,
right?
yeah.
It, like kind of it just overwhelms. It increases the like frequency of it, and so
Mhm.
almost it just drowns it out completely.
Like I forgot about Dan Daniel.
Yes, no, it's but there's so many things I think as well. Like in theory, this as a video could have been, 20 hours long because there are so many things, and I'm sure, like, as people, if we all were to sit here and chat about things, moments in time that shifted our consciousness about the way the Black body is existing in the world, or how it's traveling, or how people are seeing it, or kind of negotiating Blackness in different ways. I'm sure people would have different ideas what that is, right? And so, like, part of the exercise here is to, like, hopefully have that be something that continues, right? Where there are other sites where that can exist and proliferate, and where people maybe can ask those questions, because I do think it's important that we do that work.
I just like speaking of like the cultural amnesia piece, I feel like there's this like it's like a pillar of white supremacy to have cultural amnesia, and they expect everyone else to have it too.
Yeah.
Whereas like Blackness is ingrained with this very, very deep specific cultural memory. Like we don't forget shit like the trip on it.
Right.
Or like Jada pose.
Right.
It's like that or worse.
No,
Somehow-
yeah.
Somehow white folks found a way to make it worse.
Well, it's also just strange how much, like, and again, tomorrow I'll talk more about this, but how much is gamified throughout all of this. Like the fact that online you can find, like sort of reenactments of what happened with Emmett Till, which was that 1955 sort of restaging, like a lot of them you can find. And that is very strange. Like it is, I mean, on the one hand, an interesting cultural exercise, because of course it helps us maybe at certain points from a sort of forensics perspective to restage something, to position ourselves in it. But on the other side, you have to ask, like, who is doing this work and why is it circulating, and actually who's watching this? And it has, like, these are videos that have millions of views. Like, why are millions of people watching Emmett Till die over and over again? Like in a kind of game sense. That is absolutely insane, right? So, there are some really bizarre things that I think are happening too, right? With this notion of like, of forgetting, right? Where even if things are excavated and kind of brought back into focus, they're being done in a way that actually, through a kind of digital language makes it feel like fantasy. And that I think is really like a trigger in a lot of ways, because there are people who cannot remember that having happened in real time, who did not study it in school, who will encounter that as a material, and they don't understand that. And the same thing, like, to bring back to what you said with Rodney King, right? The first viral video. It's such a moment in time, but how that was kind of exploited, and how that was circulated, and who was doing that work was like at the hands of a lot of people who were not Black people, and were not necessarily thinking with care about the like actual significance of what that was, to have a video like that, and like bearing witness in a way to something that was like a really monumental devastation culturally, right? Like, and to a body that was a real body. So, these things I think are things like when they kind of travel from their original site, they like echo very differently, and people, really do a lot of work, I think, to like keep it very viscous in that way. So actually it becomes complicated to come back to the original source. Yeah.
I feel like there's so much in there about like blackness being created as something to be consumed,
Mm-hmm.
and like the obsession not only with like the consumption of blackness, but like the absorption of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only were literally eating us, but like there's all this other sort of like I guess the digital consumption has become like a new way to consume blackness, and so they try to absorb it.
It's like a rehearsal for the real IRL version, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Other questions?
You need to go to bed. Thank you.
No, yeah, I'm happy to stick around and chat. It's really nice being here. Thank you. My pleasure.
No, I love this. This is like, this is everything. You're very not credible, but you clearly. I guess you just have to practice all day too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like nice weather.
So you reach right.
Yeah, let's fold up chairs and leave them against the back wall. That would be super
Video.
Yeah, that was really nice.
Thank you for sending me an email. This is the second time. The last time I did the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. $300 a month. I mean, for me. No, but I've heard. I mean, no, sure, yeah. She's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. Oh, good. Good. Awesome. No, I was like, yeah. Right, yeah. Sure. I mean, it's such a strange space. Yeah, but after writing, I have to do like next few weeks, but See what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And if you need
I'm not the case. Maybe go to the beach cafe.
Literally whatever you want to do.
Really chill out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you want
Might do it all. Like, really posing some stuff. No.
Yeah.
I might do something out there, but the thing fundamentally is like super minimal and it's like based on specific logic. Like calculations on the Harmonic series. It's like even if it wasn't happening now, I'm not as much into that. Like I still like reality.
how you create.
You're bringing me on to like come up from the logic puzzle, like actual sound. Yeah, and it's kind of it's hard to really you know, Dave and I just came back. You ever want to do that? Hey man, good to see you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's more snacks and stuff over there.
Yeah,
There's still everything.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so like other things in the works, but.
I'm beginning to be weird.
Okay. I do normally.
I'm done. I've been working on my build out.
Yeah, of course. Oh, I haven't yet. That was awesome. Is it the color? Like 2 hours.